first watched Dakaretai Otoko Ichi ni Odosarete Imasu back at the tail end of 2018, my feelings were much less than favorable. Especially for an anime whose name I spent so much time trying to memorize! At the time, my YouTube channel was in the end of its first year, and as I've said in a previous video, I was in the midst of an overwhelmingly delightful anime season filled with so many anime that were or would become all-time faves. And even after a lukewarm reception to Citrus earlier that year, Girls' Love was also getting some time to shine. But on the boys' love side of things, Dakaichi was proving to be yet another polarizing BL anime. Aren't they all? Because it was another 18+ BL manga changed and censored for TV anime standards, because of its Makoharu actor AU character designs with egregious shadow chins, and most notably because of its portrayal of yet another BL couple whose relationship is initiated from a scenario classified by many as containing dubious consent, more tropely known as DubCon. Now, at the time, Dakaichi and its content was not an anomaly within what kinds of BL anime already existed and were popular. Arguably, the three most popular BL anime as of 2018 were Junjo Romantica, Sekaiichi Hatsukoi, and Love Stage, all BL anime that contained DubCon scenarios. So to the Western anime viewing masses, Dakaichi was just another yaoi. It was just another BL anime everyone except for a select few viscerally disliked for any list of reasons ranging from personal preferences to full-on homophobia. I myself was one of the many people who disliked Dakaichi. I gave it a 5, wholly because I just did not enjoy the relationship dynamic between Takuto and Junta. And while the DubCon scenarios were a strong reason to dislike the series for others, it was not one of mine. However, it should be noted that while Dakaichi was widely panned by a vocal minority of English-speaking fans, its MAO score is honestly not terrible, as y'all know everything I love gets a 6. And where the money matters, not only did it get a sequel movie, but in Japan, its DVDs and Blu-rays regularly ranked in the top 5 for anime Blu-ray and DVD sales as they were released. Now let's cut to the chase and talk about DubCon, what it is, what it isn't, particularly why it exists in BL, the hypocrisy around criticizing BL for including it, and my overall feelings on the concept. DubCon is a shortening of the term dubious consent. It is a concept that occurs in primarily romance stories around the globe, where a romantic or sexual act between characters is viewed as having questionable consent, particularly when compared against what qualifies as consent per real-world practices. To clarify, because people on the internet regularly use words they don't know the meaning of to try to be trendy, fit in, and pretend they know what they're talking about, DubCon is not a fandom slang term for noncon, noncon being short for non-consensual. The key difference between DubCon and noncon is that DubCon acts are often framed, presented, or later explained to ultimately be consensual in spite of their blurred lines execution. Because as someone reading or watching a story, you know the full story from a first and third person perspective, and should be able to discern how characters truly feel about each other and their interactions in spite of what they say, a cumulative context that only exists in fiction. Whereas non-con is much more black and white in defining actions as strictly not consensual. The most common example of DubCon in BL being something along the lines of an uke saying no or vocally resisting during sex, but ultimately continuing to interact with and form a relationship with the seme they initially were resisting. Ukes are often characterized to be tsunderes and generally more reluctant to romantically or sexually interact with other men, in spite of their out loud and or internally expressed and repressed attraction to said men. They'd rather not be one of the gays because society hates the gays. More on that in a bit. Now, everyone interprets DubCon scenarios differently. Everyone has a different tolerance or none at all for DubCon as a plot device, and I am never here to force anyone to like something that makes them uncomfortable, nor to convince anyone honestly anything other than to watch Major Second and Idol 7. However, I am here to help anyone who gives a fuck to understand. And to understand why DubCon exists in BL, a subgenre of media of Japanese origin that portrays romantic and sexual relationships between men, you must first understand the society it is created within. A lot of y'all older subscribers probably heard a version of the following before, so bear with me. Japan, first and foremost, like every country in the world honestly, is not queer accepting. It's not the worst, it's tolerant, but tolerance is not acceptance. Same-sex marriage is not currently legal nationwide, albeit a recent court ruling could have that changing very quickly, very soon. From my understanding, a form of legal partnership is currently somewhat available in some prefectures, but still does not hold the same privileges as straight marriages. Also, like most countries in the world, because society gonna society, Japan is a country whose social structure is heavily reliant on conformity, and in oversimplified terms, not causing trouble for anyone or drawing negative attention to yourself, and by association, your family. Combine the queer tolerance but not acceptance with a social structure that encourages not sticking out for the quote-unquote wrong reasons and following a rigid copy-and-paste lifestyle from birth till death. Being openly gay in Japan or pursuing relationships publicly with someone of the same gender is not the ideal situation for anyone trying to either follow the manual for the quote-unquote average Japanese man's life or live a harassment-free life devoid of judgment and negative attention. Workplace discrimination, among other things, also exists. Yay! So when it comes to the portrayal of men-attracted men in fictional media, particularly in BL, it's natural for BL characters to be portrayed as reluctant, apprehensive, and vehemently against pursuing their own same-gender attraction. DubCon DubCon then acts as a plot device to emphasize the reluctance male characters feel due to societal pressure, to hammer home how hard a decision it is to be themselves and love who they love, when they are now inviting the risk of social ostracism which could harm them in any multitude of ways. To be more specific, when an uke is saying something to the extent of quote-unquote "no, I don't want this" when a seme is kissing or having sex with them, the "no, I don't want this" is not "no, I don't consent to these acts," and instead a denial of their enjoyment at being in a situation that allows them to express their sexual and or romantic attraction, for fear of the repercussions that accepting these feelings and indulging in these actions would invite as a result. Also, if you're a tsundere character and you don't want your boo to know that you love them because your male ego interprets a confession as a loss, you're not just gonna give in so easily. Your pride as a man won't allow it. Now, is DubCon the most ideal concept to display queer reluctance? Maybe not, but given the cultural context, it makes sense why it's a thing, and more importantly, it's not like DubCon is only a BL thing. Now, ignoring DubCon's prevalence in heterosexual media and porn outside of Japan, and aside from the fact that a lot of people who are so quick to criticize BL as problematic for its use of DubCon sure as hell don't have that same energy for straight hentai, within the criticisms of DubCon and BL lies the ever-common talking point that DubCon existing in BL is because it's written by women and lacks the touch of authenticity a gay mangaka would bring. A criticism that tells me that a lot of the people who both dislike BL for being predominantly written by women, as well as claim to want queer men to write stories about queer men because they'd bring quote-unquote authenticity, have never actually taken the time to read enough gay-made manga and doujinshi from the gay men mangaka of Japan. And I don't mean y'all should read My Brother's Husband, I mean y'all should read Gengaro Tagame's other works like Virtus and Kimi Yoshiruya Minami no Goku. Then tell me how the gays would portray consent. Shit, y'all should give Zenith a whirl. See you in hell. And it's not like Gengaro Tagame is an outlier either. Kenta, Kobucha, my all-time fave Ito, the list goes on, but bottom line, DubCon and even rape fantasy is an ever-prevalent trope in Japanese men's love manga, also known as bara. So to argue DubCon wouldn't be present with gay mangaka behind the BL wheel is uneducated and misguided at best. Now, the reasoning why noncon bara manga appeals to gay audiences and why the preachy quote-unquote pro-gay faction of BL fans are hypocrites afraid of muscle, fat, and body hair is a whole other video in itself. But to get back to the topic of this video, after Dakaichi season ended with the year of 2018, 2019 presented a BL anime that would come to be arguably the most popular and most positively received BL anime of all time for Western audiences, the first season of Given. Gay Beck, as a patient of mine once called it, had unparalleled Western popularity, due in part to many viewing it as an unproblematic BL. Well before its next two arcs. But along with Given's popularity also came a substantial rise in BL-hating BL fans on social media who readily praised Given for everything it was not, even though most of those things Given very much was or became. These people infested BL and MLM Japanese media discourse in the following years with their overly sensitive, way too invested in fiction, desperately attempting to escape reality temper tantrums, to the point where apparently, in this season itself, people are even trying to quote-unquote cancel Sasaki for flirting with Miyano. What? So to be honest, after having seen stupid shit like this for the past few years grow in prevalence, I had grown spiteful in ways I did not think were possible. And in the final month of 2021, when I was in the early stages of planning Fujoshi February 2022, I decided to form an alliance with the enemy of my enemy and give Dakaichi a second try. And honestly, I'm really glad I did. Now, when I tell you this was the redemption of Dakaichi, I mean a redemption in the sense of being redeemed in my eyes, not the general public's. I don't give a fuck what the general public thinks. The general public gives my fave sixes and sometimes fives. Also, full transparency, I didn't just flip my opinions on Dakaichi to be contrarian. Did I give it a second chance despite the same losers on Twitter who say Hawks is quote-unquote minor coded? Oh yeah! However, I honestly thought going in that ultimately my feelings would be unchanged, but at least I'd have a refresh on the story to use for a video about DubCon in BL. Now, when it comes to my personal feelings on DubCon, it's not a trope that personally bothers me. However, I do always give a warning about potential scenarios that could be perceived as such being in content, because I know how strongly some people feel about it. But as someone who has not only consumed DubCon a lot within BL, but also much more so in straight hentai, bara manga, and even Western gay porno comics, I have always understood the intention of the trope and the meaning behind verbiage related to it from a cumulative storytelling perspective. But I will say, depending on why I'm reading or watching the trope in the first place determines how focused I am on it being a thing. If I'm watching or reading a story with DubCon cause I'm horny, like Like a lot of people who consume BL for just the sex scenes, much like people who consume straight hentai for the same reason, we don't care about the specifics of the plot. Where is the dicking down? We don't care how we get there. I think we can all understand. That's me reading My Kingdom, aka Silent War, along with several other pornwa untranslated. What do I need a translation for? I don't need to know context. There's no sex in context. So if I'm literally just reading to be aroused, the consent of hot drawn characters is in the back of my mind because they're just attractively penciled together drawings doing the do. I mean, if there's blood coming from orifices during penetration, I may not be into it. You know what? I take that back. It depends. Is he hot? But if I'm reading for the story, which I do for 99% of BL I come across, because most BL art styles, whether manga, manhwa, or anime, just don't appeal to me sexually, I am more aware of it existing and I can find it to be undesirable, but only because I find the couple or one of the characters in the couple undesirable. So it's not even the DubCon that's actually bothering me in the first place, it's the fact I have to watch undesirables fuck it all. Now, how did my feelings on Dakaichi change? Why has Dakaichi been redeemed in my eyes? Dakaichi has been redeemed because the second time through, I realized Junta has Hakuo Seiwu. Not often am I wrong, but I can admit when I'm wrong, all is forgiven. But in all seriousness, I think going into Dakaichi already knowing how I felt about the characters and how everything would play out allowed me to actually see all the aspects of the story instead of being distracted because of my previous knee-jerk bias against Junta, my Azumayapathy, if you will. Although I will say I still find Takato and Ryo to be a more interesting concept for a couple, especially because Ryo is one of the very few instances where Yuma Uchida isn't typecast into playing a gruff, troubled angst whore. And even though I have come around to Junta and Takato, I will never come around to how much food they wasted. People are starving! Where did that cake go? I'm not buying Nendoroids of wasteful characters. But if you want to hear how another Nendo got me into watching another anime, become a patron! To hear my full review of Welcome to the Ballroom coming on Wednesday, just join the OTR with Gene Tor tier, or get access to other podcasts, videos, and more by becoming a patron of any tier like my newest patrons, Kaylin S., Atticus Radicus, Sinani, Tay, The Truck, Jess, Himeji, Chris Vickman, and Elena Parvisto. Only one more video left for Fujoshi February. That'll be up on Friday, so subscribe and turn on notifications so you know when it's up. It might be about Sasaki, it might be about Miyano, maybe it's about both. Or neither. Bye!